The following is a conversation with Ashok D Pandey, former professor and researcher in earthquake engineering at IIT Roorkee. His work majorly involved in analysis of structures, where he began working on projects related to Idukki Dam, Narora atomic power plant, Powerhouse structures, and later on moved to earthquake analysis of dam structures, both gravity and rockfill dams, and then to fatigue analysis of railway structures. I took his course on numerical methods for dynamic systems during my masters at IIT Roorkee. I have had numerous opportunities to interact and learn from him beyond the official engagement, and I still do. And most importantly, he is a humble, down-to-earth and a nice human being to talk to. In this conversation with Ashok D Pandey, we will explore the world of academics, teaching, education, original thinking, and also listen to him talk about his experiences. Hope you enjoy this conversation, and I appreciate that you have given us some time to talk to you through this podcast to what this conversation might bring to your job or life as an original thinker and a nice human being. Thank you for doing this.
No, it's no sweet.
So, it's been 6 years since I took your course on numerical methods for dynamic systems. I'll begin with that.
Yeah.
That was one of the course which felt fulfilling.
Yeah.
Throughout my academic setting. I really liked your approach, the way you taught your course, but where did it come from?
The approach. Now that's interesting, these questions are very tough for us to answer because I don't know what my approach was. And okay, let me just go back to how this whole thing started. Right?
Yeah.
Like I got an offer at the end of my viva, my master's viva, which lasted almost an hour and 45 minutes. And the last question I was asked was that when are you joining faculty in earthquake engineering department? And till then I hadn't even thought of what I was to do. I hadn't applied anywhere. So my response was, as soon as you have a vacancy. Now once this episode took place, after the viva I went to V.K. Jain. He was a research scholar in civil, almost like an elder brother. And I told him I have an offer from earthquake engineering department.
This was after your masters?
Just after my viva.
Okay.
Like the viva took place in the evening.
Yeah.
And late evening I went to his house, told him aise offer hai, and he said, good. Now some of the dialogues that took place were in Hindi, but I'll stick to English, or should I use both?
Anything.
Yeah. So I said, Dada, मेरे को एक ऑफर मिला है earthquake engineering ज्वाइन करने का.
Yeah.
He said, बहुत अच्छा, तो मुबारक हो. तो तुम क्या पढ़ाओगे? My this thing was, forte then was analysis, FEM analysis. So I told him कि finite element पढ़ाऊंगा. He said, अच्छा. तो non-linear analysis पढ़ा सकोगे? ऐसे दादा वो तो अभी किया नहीं है मैंने. इसे तो फिर क्या पढ़ाओगे? ऐसे तो numerical methods पढ़ा दूंगा. These were my strengths, I thought. So I said, numerical methods. अच्छा, सब आता है. I said, नहीं, पढ़ाने लायक तो काफी आता है. He said, तो optimization किया है क्या? I said, हाँ, linear तो कर रखा है. He said, नहीं, non-linear. I said, वो तो नहीं किया. फिर तो क्या खाक पढ़ाओगे? So I said, तो फिर क्या मैं छोड़ दूं? So V.K. Jain's wife said, अरे काय कोई बच्चे को परेशान करते हो? कोई जरूरी है क्या? So VK Jain said, नहीं ऐसे ही है. So VK Jain said, नहीं ले तो लो, लेकिन बड़ी दिक्कत होगी, तुम पढ़ा कुछ नहीं पाओगे, लेकिन एक काम कर सकते हो. अच्छा, बहुत साइड ही से तुम बच्चों को मोटिवेट कर सकते हो. And that is the underlying principle of all I've done in the 40 years or more. So I never really taught you all. I just motivated you all to learn and grow on your own. Atmanirbhar Bharat, they're discovering now. Yeah. We discovered it
together. So that's what I found it different. When we teach, like usually when you lecture a class or teach a set of pupils or students,
yes.
So one thing is we assume a personality where we think I'm the teacher because I know so and so, and you're going to listen to it because you don't know. So that takes away the essence of finding the truth or following a quest to find out things together.
True.
So I think that was different, because your lecture never felt like it was a lecture, because I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
There were people who usually skip lectures.
Right.
So they weren't willing to skip your lecture, even if they was late by 10 or 15 minutes. They would just rush back and just sit down in the class, ask for what has happened in the past 5 to 10 minutes. I would just be surprised when, oh my God. So that like how these guys used to usually skip the other classes, but they weren't actually willing to skip the classes. I mean, what I mean to say is they enjoy the process of learning, but there should be something which you think you consciously put an effort in while you teach.
Well, the way you put it, I think, it's a two-way reaction. When I enter a class, I have in mind that today I'm going to tell them how simple whatever I'm going to teach today really is.
Yeah.
Because when I was doing my master's, right, and even I'll say starting from school, the seniors would say, "Ye subject or ye topic bahut tough hai." There was always a curiosity. What is meant by tough? I mean, do I have a limited brain that is going to be incapable of assimilating the underlying concepts? Are they that complicated? So, with that kind of a thing, when I came to civil, do my master's in civil over here at Roorkee, Dr. Trikha had come back from Swansea. Dr. Nayak came subsequently, right? And it was like this, that most of the research scholars, master's students, everybody was so overawed with finite elements. Means it's too complicated.
Okay.
And
that was in the beginning days of, finite element was there much before that, right?
Yeah, finite element, we go back to 56 or so, when Argyris really laid the foundation stone for it.
Yeah.
Right, in a more formal manner. It's just that Zinkiewicz, he had this showmanship which Nayak inherited. Those were people who could make, drawing a straight line with a ruler.
Okay.
Such a big event that you could actually have the press coming in to cover it.
Yeah.
So, with that kind of a thing, when it started, I was lucky that Dr. Nayak asked me to modify a program written by D.V. Phillips for mesh generation.
For what?
Mesh generation.
Mesh generation, yeah.
And with not much, I will say, documentation available, I really had to go through theory to be able to debug the program and modify it.
Okay.
And I think it was a good thing that I was given the program to modify, because unless you're rock sure with the theory, you can't really program anything.
Yeah.
So then I understood what shape functions actually were, how they are used, how they can be manipulated.
Okay.
And we did use that kind of a thing at subsequent stages. I've used shape functions for even time domain interpolation, cross-sectional interpolation of river Brahmaputra.
Okay.
So when I discovered that these things were really not that difficult, so then there was always this thing that I need to let the students know that it's not as complicated as people make it out to be.
Yeah.
The same thing was true with regard to your matrix analysis of structures. When we were taught, it was like everything was over everybody's head. But small group of friends, we were more interested in finding out or exploring. And the basics of stiffness matrix analysis, I think we were able to grasp. And once you understand the basics, then the rest is really easy. So throughout, I think my approach would have been to really start from the most basic steps and show that the subject matter isn't that complicated.
Yeah.
I mean, classic example, which I think is one of my favorites, is that when we are learning your central difference method, right, then your Newmark's beta and stuff like that. So I would say that let's skip this topic because you all have done it in school. Because the whole basis used to be what? S is equal to ut, right? Uniform velocity. S is equal to ut plus half ft squared. Uniform acceleration. And that would, like that association give the students, I think, a lot more confidence to build up from there. I think that about sums up, because if somebody can correlate with something they already know, then it's very easy to build up on that.
That also requires you have a strong base, or build a strong base if you don't have.
Yeah, true. The other thing was that the abstraction that was involved in, I would say, a person's school background or undergraduate studies of just using a formula, whatever it be, whether it was finding out square roots or whatever, that myth had to be broken, that a person needed to know from where that formula has come, what it implies. Because as engineers, we need to take decisions in places where a lot of gray areas will exist, so many variables will exist. And unless a person is capable of independent thought in a rational manner, it becomes difficult to take those decisions. So the emphasis had to be to make the students think.
Yeah.
And I don't know how successful I've really been, but, well, I tried.
Yeah. So when you say the ability to generate an independent thought and a rational basis, how did you do that? Because no one does it consciously, but according to you, what do you think?
No, it had to be prodded. So, in order to do that, I would start with, defining what we are going to do. And the purpose of doing it, because if you don't know in which direction it's going to go, then it's meaningless. I think the first thing really, in order to learn something, is to be motivated towards it.
Yeah.
If I know that by learning a particular topic or whatever, right, what all I can achieve, then I'd be more motivated towards learning. I think generate a little bit more interest. Rather than, out of the blue, somebody comes up with a topic and let's do this without assigning a reason. That's meaningless. So that was one.
Yeah.
The second was that ask the student, it was an interactive session, and I could pick up anybody randomly. There were times when I would pick up the weaker guys. Why? Not to shame them really, but to prompt them into the process.
Yeah.
That no, just because your performance is not that good doesn't mean I'm not going to ask you. You're just as good for me as the brightest in the class. So I've picked on the brightest, I've picked on the weakest, I've sat by the brightest, I've sat by the weakest.
Yeah.
Because the tragedy was that when I started teaching, I started with very few students. So I always had a bad habit of trying that one-to-one interaction.
Okay.
Now, how successful it was, how offended the students may have felt, I don't know.
I think that worked well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was another aspect about your course was the question papers you had weren't descriptive. I mean, you had only a question and filled the answer, unlike all the rest of the courses. So I once heard you telling about what kind of a dilemma you faced when you're grading a paper between.
I think you've touched upon a very delicate subject. After so many years of teaching, I realized that at some stage, when I was evaluating the descriptive question answers, and I think it was fairly early in my career, I felt that the marks awarded depended on so many things, right? Because we had a very small class, so I could tell by the name of the candidate was obviously there. And it would depend on my mood, I will say. If I'm in a foul mood, I might mark more strictly. If I'm in a lighter mood or in a more congenial mood, I might award marks more graciously, I will say, or generously.
Yeah.
And I always had this feeling of guilt that, have I done justice? At one stage I felt, no, I don't think I've done justice. So then the question arose, how can I be fair in my dealing with this issue? And the only sort of thing that came to my mind was, break it down to a binary situation, right? Binary situation means he's got the answer right of a small portion, so I had to break the question into such parts that sort of elicited smaller responses. And those would be the more critical areas of the solution process.
Okay.
So then once I got into the binary, it was either full marks or zilch over there. And later, modified, I would look to see if the student had actually done any calculation.
Okay.
If there was no calculation, even if his answer was right, it was wrong.
So how did you look at the calculation? Because since it's
I would always start by first going through all the responses without looking at names.
Yeah.
So I get a feel for how well the class has understood that particular subject. After going through that, then I start the actual marking, right? And if a person's answer was right, I would check to see, has he done any calculation?
Yeah, on the answer sheet.
On the answer sheet.
Okay.
So if you thought, I never looked at your answer sheet, guess again.
I don't remember, but whatever I did, I think I...
There were times when I found that two students had identical answers, right? No calculation. And the answer matched with somebody's. So I would write on the answer script that the marks have been awarded to the person who did it. Right? So you can take from him if you want or whatever.
Yeah.
No, I didn't like anybody copying in an exam. You know why? Because the exam marks, they don't make your career. They don't. In fact, they degrade you as an individual if you've cheated.
Yeah.
I mean, you have a conscience. Some stage in life, you may feel otherwise. I don't know.
Yeah.
It varies from individual to individual.
Yeah, even there was about exams in general.
Yeah.
So I think I've shared it with you earlier, but I'll share it again. There was a essay I read by Paul Graham. He's he runs the Y Combinator. It's a seed investing company. So he wrote an essay called A Lesson to Unlearn, where he correlates our behavior to hacking behavior, which we unconsciously pick up by hacking the exams.
True.
So in the sense, the person who tops the class doesn't necessarily mean he has copied, but he has found a way to hack the exam.
True.
So that we carry on to the other parts of our lives where if you want to just do some work, so we'll just find a way to hack a task or something where we can just, succeed. So that's what I think unconsciously trains us. A lesson to unlearn.
Yeah, I think the author has a point, right? And that was one reason why I made my question papers right at the last moment.
Yeah.
Many of my students may not know about it, but I would get up and come to the department at 4:30, 4 in the morning, think about the questions, think about your doubts in class. On the basis of that, I would make my question paper.
Okay.
Because if I made my question paper before,
and
after I make a question paper, somebody asks me something relevant to a question over there, then I would be in a dilemma as to what extent do I help him out or explain things to him.
Yeah.
There could be a tendency for me to divulge contents of the paper, and I didn't want to feel guilty of that.
Okay, so that necessarily gives him an advantage that he's unconsciously hacking your question paper.
That's one way of looking at it, I'd say. But I always wanted to have a clean conscience. That's about it.
Yeah, that's nice.
Whether it was marking or setting the question paper, things like that.
Exams are just part of it, so I don't want to
true. Exams is not a very important part because my opinion is that an examination is just an assessment of a person's ability within a 3-hour duration or a 2-hour duration, whatever it be, right, on a particular day, right, with regard to a particular set of questions. Now, wait a minute. This isn't as simple as it sounds, right? Let us say somebody studies just one night and the sort of 10 questions he did, 5 of them come in the question paper. So here we have a guy who's going to score very high without really understanding the subject. On one occasion, very early in my career, I had this person, Padmanabhan. He was like, I think, SE, Superintending Engineer, when I was a graduate trainee in PWD.
Where it is?
CPWD, Delhi.
Delhi. What time it was?
This is way back, 75. I took my training in, I think, 70, 71.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. And Padmanabhan was here in 75. So Padmanabhan, with his experience and his background, he was able to quote more references than some of the faculty members.
Okay.
Right? His background was solid. And a very soft-spoken person. And he was more interested in, learning whatever he could. So he was scoring in 90s in most of the subjects. And I think I was teaching them Fortran programming and numerical methods. So he was doing all right. But just before the exam, his father expired. And in the final exam, he scored very low marks. He passed, of course. Very low marks means 60-something. Now, for a person who's scoring in 90s and suddenly he comes down to the 60s, you feel bad about it. So then I realized that, this examination thing is not really a measure of how much a person truly knows.
So tell me about any favorite books, or there can be any number of books which you think had a very big impact in your life or the person you are.
Now, when it comes to books, I mean, my interests have been very varied, very, very varied. So I would say it will be better if I start with the academic aspect of it.
Yeah, it can be anything.
One of my favorite books was Numerical Analysis by Scarborough. My elder brother bought it for me. Those days it cost 10 rupees. And I liked the way it was written. And I think, my interest in numerical analysis really stemmed from that one book. That was one. The other book was Thomson.
Calculus Made Easy by Thomson.
Calculus Made Easy.
I like that book. I recently came across it.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very nice book in the sense.
Unfortunately, what happened was that my introduction to Thomson was at such a stage when I had gone past the contents of the book.
Okay.
But I did go through the book to some extent. I won't say I've read the whole book.
Yeah.
Right? And the way he put things was truly fascinating. And if you consider my background, when I joined BHU first year engineering, I hadn't done statics, I hadn't done dynamics, I hadn't done coordinate geometry, I hadn't the foggiest idea about differential calculus or integral calculus. It was like, for me, Greek and Latin. Like in thermodynamics, they used to have a CHU units and BHU units or whatever that was. I think it was British thermal units, but I don't know, I couldn't get out of this thing that I would refer to them as the BHU units and the CHU units.
Okay.
So it was very, very difficult, And I will say second year of engineering in BHU, I got a back paper in integral calculus and electrical technology.
Okay.
So I'd gone back to the hostel during the vacations to prepare for my back papers. And one of my seniors, he told me that it would not be worthwhile, sort of trying to prepare for the back papers. Because he said earlier, you tried on your own, you didn't do too well, right? So there's no point in you again trying on your own. You need some more inputs. So he said third year, you have Dr. Shantiram Mukherjee. He'll teach you integral calculus. And he said, hey, तुम उसका क्लास मिस करेगा तो तेरा खानदान में किसी को calculus नहीं आएगा. So I took his advice seriously. I went over to my grandmother's place locally. And when the session started, I was back there. But I made it a point to go and sit for Shantiram Mukherjee's classes well before time. I was told that you sit right up front, he talks softly. And Shantiram Mukherjee started with multiple integrals. But the way he explained multiple integrals, linking them to areas and volumes, it became such a simple subject that I've never had problem with integrals subsequently. And once I understood integrals, then the derivatives just fell into place. So I will say that Thomson's book, when I look back, it's almost like Shantiram Mukherjee. So these are two of my favorites really. Then another book, apart from Scarborough, that I liked was a book on FEM by Beaufait, Rowan, and two more authors. That also explained FEM in a very basic manner.
Like a primer?
Yeah, it was like a primer.
Okay.
And of course, there's a whole lot, many books, which have influenced the way I think, the way sort of I worked. A lot of programming was involved in the earlier stages. And I will say good many books, good many authors contributed to that. I may not be able to do justice by remembering or ignoring or forgetting some of their names. So it's best to avoid that. But yeah, when it comes to teachers, we had, I was in UK for some time, and I was stuck with an integral, It was like minus infinity to plus infinity, the integral of u minus x dot mod of the whole thing into u minus x dot du. And I must have spent about, I'll say 6 weeks going through, all kinds of mathematical handbooks and so on and so forth. And I had gone through the UCL library, that is University College London. I went through the archives and so on and so forth. Nothing. I then went to one of the bigger libraries, the British Library, tried over there also. And, it was like a very frustrating affair. Then one of my friends, Robert Caroline, he's a PhD from Loughborough, he suggested that why don't you go down to Dr. A.M.J. Davies. He was in maths at UCL.
Mathematics professor.
Mathematics. So I told Bob that, look, I don't know Dr. Davies, and why should he help me out? So Bob Caroline said that, look, you have a problem. You've been stuck with it for a long time. You go to him, right? If he doesn't help you out, you're still stuck there.
Yeah.
You haven't lost anything. But if he helps you out, or whatever he does helps you in solving the problem, then you stand to gain. So you have nothing to lose, but it's something to gain kind of a proposition. I took his advice and went up. I remember that day. It was very close to winter vacations, and the college was more or less deserted. The high-rise buildings all sides. And this building was right at the corner with a very ancient kind of a lift. You had that chain kind of a door and so on and so forth.
Okay.
So I go up to his room, knock on the door. I hear a voice say, enter. I come in. I see this man. He's looking out. There's just one window. He's looking out at the London skyscape. And I told him, Dr. Davies, I'm Ashok Pandey from Marine Tech, and I have a problem with an integral. So without turning back, he said, write it on the board. I wrote it on the board. And then he turns around, he's holding a pipe. He looks at the expression, and he gives me the answer. So he wrote down the answer. He said, there you are. So I said, sir, that was brilliant. Well, how did you arrive at it? I mean, I need to know how to be able to solve such problems in future. And then he started describing the function, which I had always just looked at as a collection of variables. And that explanation, he broke the integral into 3 parts. He said this part will be negative, this part will be 0, and this part will be positive. And this is how it goes. It behaves like the error function. So you have the sum of 2 error functions, and that is your solution. That day, I think, changed my life forever. I don't look at things as variables, right? I try to visualize the behavior. And that makes things so much simpler. I think, that's maybe that influenced some of my class teaching. Apart from academic, I've always been an avid reader. Read most of Sherlock Holmes. But it was more the DIY books, But one book I think I cannot forget was Bertrand Russell's Conquest of Happiness. I'd borrowed it from a friend, and those days I would finish a novel at night. Every night I read a new novel.
Okay.
Right? Our reading speed was phenomenal. And I found, that it was easier for me to relax and catch up with sleep. So Bertrand Russell's novel I brought, I hadn't picked it up for a few days. And then my friend, he said that, look, can I have it back? Somebody else wants it. So I told him, okay, you take it tomorrow. I read that novel, or rather, I read that book that night. And we used to get our newspapers in the evening, early evening or late afternoon. Next day, in the newspaper, it was that Bertrand Russell expired.
Okay.
So I can never forget that book. Of course, there may be many others which...
What was the book about?
Conquest of happiness. I mean, like, what an individual's attitude should be, and so on and so forth. But, when I read a book, I know one thing, I'm getting an individual's perspective on the subject. If I read more books in a similar manner, I get their perspectives. It gives me a better holistic view of the situation, whatever aspect it is, whether it's technical, non-technical, spiritual, whatever. So that is there.
That reminds me that even when we, as a professor or as a teacher, so I remember you telling me that if you take a subject, you make sure that you read about the same subject, I mean the textbooks, by different authors.
True. Yes. Yeah.
So that gives you a holistic understanding and a different, very wide perspective of teaching. When you teach, you tend to look from different angles.
Yes, you noticed that I had many books on the same subject.
Yeah.
Yes, it's important really, because see, every individual has their own style of writing, and there have been times when I found, some of the books, they are a little bit difficult to comprehend, and some people write in a language which makes the subject matter so easy to understand. It varies from individual to individual, because there are times when I've referred some of my favorite books to a student, and he has found that difficult. In fact, he has found something which I found difficult, he has found it easier. So it varies from individual to individual. And my suggestion is always there, that try to read from more than one book. You have a broader perspective, that is true.
Moving ahead, can you talk about or say what do you think to have your beliefs or your learnings or conclusions you have arrived in the past to be challenged from time to time in future by a new perspective or an information?
So it's important that we sort of get different perspectives. And I will say, as a teacher, the different questions that the students asked, it made me look at things from different perspectives. So I stand enriched in a way, because once I wrote to a friend of mine, I don't know if I learnt more from them or they learnt more from me. That's a fact. I mean, the same sort of it was never a run-of-the-mill questions, and always encouraged कि जो भी पूछना है पूछ लो, इधर नहीं पूछना, बाद में पूछ लेना. You come to my office, you catch me on the road, it's okay. You have a doubt, let's attend to it. Rather than, at the moment I'm busy. No. I promise myself that one thing, I'll leave my door open, whoever wants to come in, comes.
That takes me to how things were when I joined masters in the institute. We were just pestering the professors that which textbooks, this is all right, this is the course content, this is the syllabus, that's okay, tell me the textbooks from where you are going to ask us the questions, and so that we can prepare and get good marks. It became very evident that this is not going to work, and this is not how masters is going to be.
Yes, I've had that question on a few occasions, And I would just say that, look, I'm not following any textbook. I'm following the nomenclature as I found most easy to understand as a student, right? And as far as books go, there are many books. You go pick up whichever one you want to learn the basics of the subject. But finally, decisions have to be your own, and it has to be based on reason. Because as an engineer, I think one has a much greater responsibility. I mean, as civil engineers, and let us say there's a dam analysis, right? And somehow my analysis shows that the structure is safe. I would not be able to still rest peacefully. There's always a doubt. Did I miss anything? Have I underestimated any of the loading parameters? And that was one reason I would always take, water level right up to the crest. I never left any clearance. No. It's better to be safe than to be sorry, right? And if it is safe from that perspective, then definitely I know I'm on the safer side.
That comes out, or the ability to, think in a direction, to be able to reason out with conviction, or to be sure about how things are going to be, things are going to act. So that requires very rudimentary knowledge about the physics or sciences or maths or anything. Because if that is not there, we are always looking towards the other complicated things to just get through that problem for time being.
Yeah, you're right. It may sound a little bit odd or surprising, whatever, but I have always laid greater emphasis on the basics, basic definitions, right? And for example, in our case, the single degree of freedom system, you'll be surprised how many decisions are made basing on that. And not just that. For example, if a force is being calculated and there are 4 terms on the right-hand side, then each of those terms must be a force. I cannot add different entities and end up with a force. No.
Yeah.
If I have area on one side, then all the other entities on the other side must relate to areas, right? I think in one of the exams I gave or tests or whatever, I gave that problem that there's a peculiar shaped this thing and its moment of inertia is this, right? And all the terms had L to the power of 4, except one term which had the dimension of L cubed. And people were guessing that this could be for this section, this could be, but there were 1 or 2 who said that this cannot be a moment of inertia.
Yeah.
These questions are sort of set just to get a feel for, are the students really thinking? Because they will have to think tomorrow. I need to prepare them today.
Yeah.
That was the, I think, major driving force.
But if the teachers themselves are not looking in that direction, so the whole effort goes the other way?
True. See, it's all a question of how you feel inside, as a teacher. For example, I knew what my shortcomings as a student were, and I wanted to make sure that the students I teach don't have those shortcomings. Any problem I face subsequently, let us say in profession, I wanted to make sure that my students were well prepared to be able to handle that. And so most of the questions, like in the tests or exams, etc., it could be a 1-hour paper, it could be a 3-hour paper, whatever. But to tell you the truth, total solution time never exceeded 35 minutes or so, maybe lesser. It's all a question of being able to understand the situation, understand the question, what its implications were, and then taking a decision. For example, I don't know which batch it was, but I gave a question that we have this cantilever, the loads are there, point loads, and while the properties of the cantilever were fixed, the load, I'd given I think it was a point load. Load could be placed anywhere, randomly, right? and the load had a mean and variance I had stated. I had asked for the mean and variance of the deflection. Now, after the exams, good number of students say, ये तो कोर्स में था ही नहीं. I said, हाँ नहीं था. नहीं था, कोर्स में नहीं था. तुम स्कूल में नहीं पढ़ा क्या? है? मीन निकालना, वेरिएंस निकालना, right? It was the same thing.
Yeah.
Just a transformation of variables, that's all. अरे सर आप वो पहले बता देती ना. And it was barely a 2-minute question with 10 marks. So that was, but I'll tell you one thing, it took a lot of effort on my part to be able to pose the questions. I mean, what is it that would make the students really think, right, and enjoy the process? That was, I think, the major objective or the driving force. How successful or how unsuccessful that experiment was, I don't know. But maybe at some stage they realized that whatever was done was for their benefit.
And that reminds me, I was reading a book called Range. It's about generalist thinking.
Right.
There was one particular example the author was talking about was, I don't know which, if it was US Army or some training institute in United States. So they ran an experiment in the sense they also teach all the technical courses to calculus, mathematics, physics and everything.
Yeah.
So there were two particular teachers. There was a course on calculus. So they had two set of groups. One group was taught with the only aim to get good grades. I mean, the teaching was set in a way, the content was delivered in such a way that the students should be able to get good grades.
Right.
And the other set of group, they were trained or they were trained or taught the subject, or the course was delivered in such a way that it's not about getting good grades, but to be able to help them understand the concepts, understand what calculus is and so forth. What happened was, at the end, the group 1, which were taught to get good grades, scored phenomenally, and the other group subsequently didn't score so good. I mean, the class average was down, everything was down. The next semester or the next year or whenever it was, the group had to take an advanced calculus.
Right.
Right. So at the end of the second semester or second year, I don't remember, at the end of the course of advanced calculus, the group 2 scored phenomenally and the group 1 scored very poor.
That's true. That's true.
So that really emphasizes how what happens when there is just a subtle difference in the way you deliver a course or a content.
Yes, I totally agree with it. See, the way I looked at things was that we are teaching the students here to go out as professionals tomorrow, right? To be able to take independent decisions, right? Without any fear or whatever of their lack of knowledge. And most of the students, they may have felt that the classroom teaching is hardly relevant to the profession. I mean, on many occasions I've had students tell me, "Sir, you teach us this matrix thing, right? Storage and all this. So where is it going to be used?" I say, it's not a question of where it is going to be used. It is, if a situation arises, right, you'll be in a better situation to take a decision. And it is nothing to do with just the matrices. It has to do with so many things, right, which could be looked at as matrices. So everything that you learn, it goes to mold the way you think in future. And that's a fact.
So what to you is science and engineering is for you personally, and how it helped you to be whatever you are?
Science and engineering, it's a fairly broad spectrum kind of a question. But let me put it this way. After I joined teaching, I think I began to realize that things weren't as difficult as, I was told about in my student days. A lot of subjects, a lot of topics in different subjects. The seniors would say, "Ye bahut tough hai. This is too tough." Or the teacher, the way he explains, you'll never be able to understand it. And I realized that no, that kind of a approach, it's a negative approach. Shouldn't be adopted at all. And so, because when you look at it, really, what is engineering? My answer has been a very short one, really. Engineering is just simple physics, very, very simple physics, and just a little bit of common sense. That's about it. And I still have a student who was here about 20 years back. He writes to me, "Sir, I still follow your advice. Stick with the physics of the problem." It's very basic. And I think that boy has been instrumental in some of the major projects undertaken by Larsen and Toubro. And I won't be surprised if they've done the analysis for Sardar Patel statue. And there's one more statue coming up. Trying to recollect, Shivaji statue or something like that.
That statue is phenomenal in terms of the structural engineering.
Yeah, true.
Because that's, when I look at it, I didn't see it in person, but I looked at the scale of it. It's so huge.
Yeah, that's true. So, I mean, I do get feedback, and some of the students, are in reasonably senior position, I'll say. And they tend to agree with me that, yes, sir, it is straightforward. It's not as complicated as we thought it was, even when we left the institute. And yes, it's simple physics and just a little bit of common sense. And I think if they feel that way, they will pass on that information or that kind of a philosophy down to the next generation. So it's good, rather than scaring the students, about subject content and decision making. No, it's not that difficult. No. See, the biggest tragedy is that right from I think primary school, one is more conditioned to study just for tests and exams. And I think parents are guilty for that and teachers are guilty for that. Exams, sort of made out to be such a big thing that if you don't do well in the exams, the child feels if I don't do well in the exams, then the world will come to an end. But the tragedy is that from an early age, that kind of a thing is developed, that one studies for the exams. When you look at it objectively, at least from my age, from the perspective I get from my age, is that one is studying for life. I mean, to live, to adjust socially, to follow a profession or whatever. So it's more of that, but it's very difficult, I think, for a young child to be able to comprehend that, right?
Or appreciate it.
Yeah, and I think what needs to be done really is that this myth of the exam as being something, very, very big, that needs to be broken. A child needs to be sort of nurtured in such a manner that learning is a process. It's a fun process and it helps you to grow up. After all, that's what it is about. Because a lot of people say that, geography, I learned geography, I learned history, I'm doing engineering. It never helped me. Of course it helped you.
Everything is...
If I say that Bosnia, in your mind straight away, you know where the hell it is, right? That's geography for you. Things like that, I mean, there has to be a reason, and you have to learn about everything in general. When I say everything, means it just can't be everything because that's just not possible, but a broad range of subjects so that you can carry on a conversation with people, you can interact with people, you can understand what is being passed across on the television or your newspaper, whatever. So that is there. And yes, you're right. The other, this thing,
more important thing was that when we look back at our education system, a lot of people would have me go back to the time of Gurukul, right? Gurukul, the students would, or the disciples would come stay at the Guru's place for years, right? Now, obviously, they would have discussed on many aspects and things like that, right? Guru would have tried to pass all his knowledge, and the students imbibed it. But in the absence of writing material, etc., in those days, knowledge was passed on by word of mouth. And the only way to retain it was to memorize. So, in Vedic maths and things like that, you've got all these sutras and things like that. If I follow Vedic maths, I know the sutra, I can solve a problem. But why does the solution emerge? That reasoning would have taken a lot more thinking, right? Which somehow, with the passage of time, people started avoiding. So, you have a sutra, you have a formula, you can crack any exam. We have a system of learning by rote and just applying it without applying our mind. This somehow would lead to what? It would lead to a loss of original thinking. It would lead to, stumping a person from thinking laterally, right?
Exactly.
Going deeper into the subject. And I think, what the final result is, that we end up having a lot of people who would make good subordinates rather than good leaders. And this I can see in so many fields today. That you give a task to a person, he do it very well. The what, whys and wherefores, he has absolutely no idea. I've even come across some students at, I'll say, 10th level, the high school level. That girl, she couldn't explain to me the question, but she wrote the answer perfectly. How on earth is that possible? She's learnt by heart the question and the answer. And that was very surprising for me. But is this number growing? That is the biggest worry.
And that brings me to one of my inclination towards, nurturing children, which is, I'll put in a perspective. Before Industrial Revolution,
right,
the scholars, whoever they were, like Newton, Galileo, or Da Vinci, or Brunelleschi, everyone, they weren't taught in a school. They pursued the interests by their own curiosity. I mean, the society's knowledge, science during that time mostly was taken forward by these people who were driven by their own curiosity. Then how when the Industrial Revolution started, so the education got institutionalized. You wanted to train people to do a particular set of tasks, and that worked very well. So that brought us where we are today. But now I see that in future, because everything you want to learn is on internet. Everything.
Yeah.
The only thing you want to teach your children is how to think originally, and they'll figure the stuff out. Right?
Yeah.
So why I think it is possible, because when you take Wright brothers or Leonardo da Vinci or Brunelleschi, the artists pursued everything by observing the nature of things and being curious about it. And there was no internet, obviously. So right now, where you can learn everything on internet. So how far is school education relevant? Because I don't think it's relevant personally. The only thing it's relevant is to teach them how to learn things, and they will figure the stuff out. Even Wright brothers, they never went to school. They pioneered the field of aviation by themselves.
Yeah, you're right in many ways. Issue is that today, when most of the material is available on the net, then children can easily have access to it, etc., etc. They can have access to many different perspectives too. The whole issue is there a will to look at things from different perspectives? We have reached a stage, what I call as that of wanting instant gratification.
That's
I have a task.
Important point.
I just want enough information that I can complete this task. I'm not interested in knowing more about it. I'm not even interested in going deeper into what was involved in this particular task. So once again, this is going to, I think, in general, not really produce brilliant minds. No. I mean, there will be exceptions. There will be exceptions. And when you look at life in reality, I'll say, then celebrities, they overawe us, overwhelm us. But we are truly inspired by the unsung heroes. You know, you come across an individual who, in your opinion, is a success, right? The press may not know him, right? The world may not know him, but he has done something which impresses you, right? He is going to inspire you. And no matter which video or how many videos we see, to the curious mind, there will always be a question which needs to be answered by an individual, speaking in a language that he can understand. Right? Sometimes it can be a teacher, sometimes it can be a peer. Because as students, we used to ask our classmates, right, for difficulties, if we felt that, yeah, he knows, he understands. And I think it's a good way to interact, and it's very fruitful. And like I said before, or let me repeat it, is that by asking, it's always a win-win situation. You have nothing to lose. If you get the answer you want, or a pointer in the direction that you want to go, it's a winning proposition for you. And if the other person doesn't respond favorably, well, you lost nothing. So I still feel that there has to be some kind of a personal interaction between two people for the knowledge to really transmit across.
And that has to be genuine. And I mean, genuine in the way that not motivated by the end goal.
Yes, true. In general, I think that if I were to ask a person a question and he knows the answer, I think 99% of the time a person would like to enrich the other person with his own knowledge. Because sharing, also gives a kind of inner satisfaction, or at least that's the way I feel. And I'm sure most of the other people feel that the joy of sharing, the joy of caring, the joy of giving, right, is a big reward in itself. So, yes, that will be there. A genuine, distinct need to help the other person out, yeah.
Coming back to the original question, in the sense that the future, maybe after 5 or 10 years, I don't think having a institutionalized education is that important as it's right now.
Yeah, I think you're right. Looking at what the pandemic has triggered is education online. I mean, it's nothing new. It did exist before, but not on the scale that it exists now and will continue to exist in future.
It has accelerated the time.
Yes, it has accelerated this. In fact, the pandemic has acted as a catalyst, right,
True.
in bringing education online. But then once again, the quantum of content available, right, the quality of content available, this I'm sure will improve with time. But what I've seen of late, I find that there are many lectures, some in NPTEL, where a person is just rattling off something from some textbook. I mean, there's no, he's not even making an honest effort to, put into his own words the subject matter. This kind of a content I've seen increasing, and that worries me. Why? The child has access to the same book, right? He can read it off from there. Why watch the video? And in fact, maybe the child would be in a better position, or the student would be in a better position to understand if he read from the book himself. But there is a compulsion now that no, the audio video content is a richer this thing. So if I see the video, I'll probably understand more. We are moving away from books. Now that's bad in more ways than one. Not just academically. I mean, like in our time we had storybooks, you had comics and whatever. You read the newspaper and you read the comics in the newspaper. The weekly edition had more comics. We had more fun as children, right? Today, who's reading the newspaper? I stopped my newspaper about 6-7 years ago, right? Because I felt the television was giving me enough news.
That's true, but how do you remedy because this is, I don't think even during your days, your college days, I don't think there were only good teachers, but there were also bad teachers then too. But when you wanted to learn something, I think, like if someone want to know about something, so he or she had to dive into his own independent pursuits to make sense of what he's trying to understand or make sense of what he's trying to know. So even that applies right now. If something is not making any sense, rather than just accepting what the person is telling, so he or she has to dive into more other content or go into a pursuit where he wants to actually figure this stuff out personally.
Yeah, you're right. Now that when there is a genuine desire to know, let us say the teachers, I'm not going to say bad teacher, it's just that it doesn't suit my style, or I was unable to follow or whatever, because we are all in the gray area, there's no such thing as a black or white, because we all have our strengths and weaknesses and so on and so forth. But looking at that kind of a scenario where I have a teacher, right, and whatever way of his style of teaching is, right, I'm unable to have adequate interest in the subject or understand it. Now wait a minute, I have to be driven by the fact that I am going to be tested. There is going to be an examination and I better pass, right? That's how the system is. So now if I have to pass, I have two alternatives. I can just, whatever notes he has given, right, or somebody has made, I borrow those notes, learn from that, learn by rote, and spit it out in the exams, and that's the end of the story. But if there's a genuine desire to learn, the first thing a person does is now start hunting for books on the topic, right? And the minute an individual has that kind of a feeling, that kind of a desire, you know one thing, that individual is going to be different. And you go through one book, it's a bit clearer, but not quite. Then you go through another and another. At the end of that exercise, you stand much richer. And that, I think, it becomes a habit then, right? Because subconsciously you realize that, yes, if I go through more than one reference, right, I stand a better chance of understanding, provided I want to understand, right? The motivation should be there. If the motivation is not there, then the whole purpose is defeated.
That has to be nurtured at a very young age. For example, take a 7 or 8 year old. He or she is very curious about anything which is which he fancies. So that nature of questioning or trying to have a original thought or independent thought is there by nature. I remember someone saying that reasoning of a 10-year-old can be more sound than a Nobel Prize winner.
Yeah, true.
Right. So what exactly is going wrong with parenting or the kind of conditioning we are put when you are a 7 or 8 year old that actually kills that and puts the person in a herd?
Yeah, I think
because I look at it as a seed being sown at that time.
True.
So once if that seed is sown where you are just asked to follow whatever is being said, Then when you grow up and you are just, looking for things, like you said, many people are good subordinates than a good leader.
Yeah, that's true.
So, because I see it that's being unconsciously sown when you are a child.
Yeah. I think that two people or two groups that are responsible are people at home, people at school. And invariably I find that people at school would have a tendency to encourage the child to copy from the board and ask questions later, if at all. That means, for example, a child stands up and says, "Sir," or "Miss," or "Ma'am," or whatever. Now, can you please, that person is told that sit down and copy it just now, right? We can discuss it later. Sometimes they say, just sit down and copy it just now. They are ended the story. And in schools, I think that's more common. I mean, it's rather unfortunate, but at undergraduate and postgraduate levels also it exists, right? That you please sit down and copy it just now. That issue of discuss it later may materialize, may not materialize. So yes, you have a point that kills the initiative, right? At home also, if a child is curious about something, right, and he is snubbed, then obviously it puts an end to, I think, a budding career, or whatever way you want to look at it. I think the environment at home should be such that it encourages a child to be curious, whether by supervision or lack of it. When I say lack of it, that means a child has ample opportunity to explore on his own. I mean, let me give you some examples of my early childhood. Summer vacations, I used to go home for the summer vacations because I was studying in a hostel. And afternoon, my dad would be in the office, my mother would take a nap, my sisters would take a nap. And me and my elder brother, since we were in the hostel, you're not used to taking naps. So the two of us used to be up. So some days it could be, like experimenting in the kitchen, salt ko heat kar, iska kya banta hai dekhte. You burn the sugar and see what happens. And then sindoor mein it's mercuric something, mercury extract karte hum log, right? You do that. And there were occasions when we tried to make carbon arc lamp, right? We took 2 batteries. I don't know whether they were in good condition or bad, right? Knocked the live daylights out of the batteries, put on the carbon this thing, right? And hooked up the mains, and yeah, it was a beautiful bright spark, and the pole fuse went. That means something like 15-20 houses got ditched.
Oh.
Immediately disconnected everything, and we put our halos on our heads and pretended to be asleep. And my mother got up, bijli chali gayi, electricity is gone, and whatever. And when my dad came in the evening, my mother told him, and then he went out, and it was a long drawn affair. But yeah, it got rectified. And nobody discovered at that time that it was just me and my brother who were responsible for this short circuit.
Oh.
But that is a learning process. I mean, the nation didn't really go for a 6, right? And similarly, like electrolysis of water, right? You took batteries and, took the 2 leads and into this thing, and there are no bubbles. I said, this water is less hydrogen or oxygen or whatever it is. So my brother says, no, you got to add some electrolyte or something. Put some salt in it, right? So you put salt in it. Yeah, you start seeing bubbles.
Yeah.
Right? That was the joy of this thing. Then on one occasion, I remember one of my father's friends, he had a relative who were making glass prisms and things like that. So they gave us 2 prisms, and I think 2 slabs of, clear glass. And that helped us to do our refraction experiments, right? That helped us to see the spectrum, right? Then taking a magnifying glass and burning paper. So we had ample opportunity of unsupervised time where we could explore on our own, right? The consequences may be slightly disastrous, but it never be the end of the world. Because curiosity doesn't lead you to murder somebody. No, it doesn't. Not yet, I hope. And I hope it never will. So that is something that needs to be nurtured. Unfortunately, you can't force a child to be curious. No, it is something that comes from within. You provide the child with that opportunity, right, to question and ask, right? And encourage if he asks. If he asks, well and good, he should get replies. Or he should be taken to some individual or whatever from where he can get the replies.
So on these lines, where you already shared with me earlier about your experience when you were a kid about the prism experiment. So I want you to share it again and tell me what exactly has changed your perspective about the nature of curiosity, the nature of independent thought one should have, or what kind of an impact that particular situation has had in your...
Okay. Right. I think it was 9th class, Yeah. And we had physics lab, and my experiment was angle of minimum deviation of a prism. So I got a drawing board, small size, and full-scape paper. I got the prism issued and got on with the experiment. Now, we had done the theory by then. So I knew that the angle of minimum deviation, I'll get a relationship between the angle of incidence, right, and the angle of deviation. And it would be parabolic in nature, right? And the lowest point would give me the angle of minimum deviation. So I started the experiment, and I think 15 degrees to 30 degrees, 45 degrees, 60 degrees, something like that. We took 5-6 readings so that we get a smooth curve. Now, unfortunately, the lowest point of that parabola, I didn't get a parabola really. I got a blip, so to say, that instead the lowest point, right, it wasn't exactly where it should have been. It was higher than the adjoining points.
Yeah, there's a sudden
now
shift.
That was like I was quite surprised, but there was no more time left. So the experiment I just submitted, right, and that was the end of the story. Now the teacher would evaluate these in the evening and hand back copies with practical copies with the full-scape paper attached to it, etc., etc. Next day, when we had the physics class, we had Mr. Mistry teaching us physics and chemistry. So he came into class and started off with, "You'll be glad to know that we have an Einstein amongst us." And he did an experiment yesterday with this minimum deviation, and he got a curve like this, and he actually drew the curve on the board. Everybody is curious, and it looked like mine, but I was hoping it wasn't. And then he said, "You want to know who it is?" Pandey, stand up. "Yeah, we have Einstein." And everybody started sniggering, and I really felt bad about it, but that was it. So red-faced me, and everybody looking at me and giggling. And he said, "And for this, he's going to stay back after school and complete the experiment again." Fine. Class finished. Some of my friends, They started ribbing me, and those who were not very friendly, they were taunting me. It was like, phew, terrible. Anyway, school ended in the evening, and I went to the lab. He was teaching his daughter, and he gave me the prism, full skip paper. I had to take the board myself, and I redid the experiment. I got the same thing. I went back, I said, "Sir, this is what I got." He said, "Are you mad? Take another sheet, and this is the last sheet. You better get it right." I went back. Once again, I drew all the angles of incidence, and so on and so forth. Completed the experiment, plotted it on the graph paper. I still got the same thing. I went to him. He said, "No, you better get the thing right, or you tell me why you're getting it wrong." I sat down. I was away from them. He was teaching his daughter, and I don't know, but I didn't know where to start at that age, what's your age? 14, 15, 16, in that region. And you're not really, I think, geared to reasoning out that much. I mean, you may be reasoning out, that's fine. And I was totally nonplussed. I don't know, but somehow, call it a miracle, and that's what I feel. And a voice from above, somewhere, wherever in the mind, wherever, told me just measure the angles. It was supposed to be an equilateral prism, and to my surprise, it wasn't. So I picked up my sheet with fair amount of confidence, fair amount of fear. I went to him. I said, "Sir, it's probably because the angles, they are not all 60. He straight away retorted, "What rubbish. We've had these prisms for years. I don't know how many students have completed the experiments, right? And not one of them has ever complained. Not one of them has got it wrong. And you come and tell me it's wrong." I'd taken my protractor along. He said, "Give me that protractor." He measured it. After measuring all the three angles, he put the prism and the protractor down on the table, stood up. He said, "Show me your hand." I thought I've had it. He's going to pick up that steel scale of his and give me a whack across my knuckles, hopefully. Right? I was hoping it would be on the palm. That hurts less, Knuckles, it really hurts bad. And with a steel ruler or steel scale, it really can be terrible. He shook my hand and he said, "Are you the Ashok Pandey who came first in KG1? I said, "Yes, sir." He's talking about something like 1955, and we are in the year 1964. I said, "Yes, sir." So he says, "That was the only year my daughter came second." I wasn't too sure, but I was like, on cloud 9, that thank God I didn't get a beating or I didn't have to repeat the experiment again. And next day, of course, he told the class that we do have an Einstein in our class. Pandey, will you stand up? He was able to tell me that the angles were not all 60, because of which his results were wrong. But it's surprising that we've had this prism for so many years and nobody ever complained. Now, of course, I was beaming that day and all my friends were like, "Yes, that's the spirit, man." So that kind of a feeling. And it was good. But then looking back, it, sort of provided me with a little bit of a learning experience. Number one, be honest with your observations no matter what. Why? If you do not conform, you may be on the edge of a major breakthrough. You never know. And if you're not on the edge of a major breakthrough, you're on the verge of a fantastic and phenomenal learning experience. So integrity in professionalism is what I picked up from that episode. The other thing was, and I think it's equally important, is that to appreciate another person, right, for what he is.
Right. I mean, I was about to tell that the beautiful part of that was the teacher is willing to stand corrected.
Yes.
And he's happy about it.
Yes.
And that's also one of the nice things about that story.
True.
Yeah.
And I think it may have crept in my, overall character that, learn to appreciate other people when they do make an effort, right? And encourage people to make an effort as well. See, episodes like this, small incidents like this, they mold our character and they leave a lasting impression. I mean, I've always looked back with the greatest of reverence for that teacher. Of course, unfortunately, I don't think he is no more, but or rather, I think he is no more. Because a few years ago, I'd inquired about him. He was in Pune, and he was unable to speak. I don't know if he was able to remember anything about school, because some of the students did go and visit him, but they could hardly communicate. His daughter is a professor in one of the universities in Pune, someplace, I believe. But I still have a wish. I don't know if I'll be able to see him, but I would like to go back and meet his daughter once. It's like, paying obeisance to a great teacher.
True.
And I would love to do that. I'll be honored to do that.
And the advent of internet, is it making us smarter or dumber?
It's making us craftier.
What does it craftier?
Craftier means more cunning, right? The plethora of information available is killing original thought, in general. I'm not saying it does the same for everybody. No, there will be a lot of people who are actually different, who stand to benefit, right, and stand to gain much, much more and contribute much more, right? Contribute back to society. But in general, there's a tendency to you just do cut and paste instead of any original thought. And the biggest tragedy is that on a particular occasion, I remember it was a research scholar, and we had this student research committee members, and the scholar was to make a presentation. Now, the write-up was such that the person had actually lifted images of text from different sources and pasted them. So they were all in different fonts, etc.
Oh.
Now, that was like, I thought, a very bad start to a very important stage in one's career. And if that is going to be the general tendency, then I think that is tragic. But I mean, let's not be too apprehensive about the situation, because there are always two sides of the coin. And there will be people who benefit, there will be people who will be able to contribute better to society, right? And there will be people contrary to that. So I hope that
that's
addresses the issue.